So in this particular topic, we are going to look at what we call management structure. This topic is going to take 3 hours, and this chapter actually looks into different ownership structures of media organization, which actually we are going to look at the privately owned, such as sole proprietorship. So privately owned organizations or privately owned institutions are usually known as sole proprietorships. We're also going to look at government-owned enterprises and joint stock companies. It also helps to highlight on the key styles of communication and the importance of communication to an organization. So we are going to look at all those things that we've talked about, that at the end of this lesson, you'll be able to ask yourself, have we been able to achieve all those objectives? Now, without wasting time, I'll go to the objectives. Now, that is just the introduction part. I'll go to the objective. And the objective of this particular unit or this particular topic are, number one, is that you must be able, at the end of this topic, you must be in a position to define what management structure is. And the next thing is that you must also be able to highlight the importance of management structure to an organization, and also outline the roles played by various people in the organization. Remember last time we looked at the basic part of management. We tried as much as possible to define what management is. So we defined management. Apart from looking at the definition of management, we also looked at the principles of management, and we also looked at the features of management. Now, one of the features of management, we said that it is universal. The next thing we said that it incorporates many disciplines, and so on and so forth. So there were 8 features of management, and there were 14 principles of management. And we said that these 14 principles of management have been castigated by a guy or a scholar by the name Henry Fayol. And apart from that, we also defined, we also said that management, structure or the system, the system of management depends on how big the organization is. Like, for example, when you're talking about how your organization is going to be, it will actually depend on, all the sections of the department that you're going to include in your organization. It depends on how big your organization is. If your organization is a small entity, then that means that you cannot have much. You cannot have so many people in that particular or various departments in that particular organization. Like, for example, you've just opened a shop that you sell clothes or you sell shoes. You cannot now say, because now I own the business, I am the sole proprietor, I'm going to have the shareholders, then I'll have the stakeholders, then from there I'll have the HR, I'll have the public relations department, I'll have the marketing department, then the finance department, etc. Remember, these are small shop, and in this particular small shop, you do not need it even doesn't have structures, because at the end of the day, you realize that the owner or the proprietor of that particular shop is the overall manager. He's the finance manager, he's the HR, he's the marketing manager. He does everything as far as that particular business is concerned. So today we are going to look at the system of management. And remember, last topic, we also looked at the various types of leadership or the management systems. We said that we have the autocratic benevolent. We said we have the laissez-faire, we said that we have the dictatorship, and we have the other one is we have the democratic. So those were the systems of management, and we said that a manager applies these particular systems of management depending on the task ahead of him. So there are times when a manager will apply the dictatorship. There are times when he will apply what we call the laissez-faire, and there are times when he will apply what we call the democratic systems of managing or management. So therefore, having said that, then we can move to this particular topic. What I was doing is a recap of the last topic so that we can move smoothly about this particular topic. So we are going to start with the overview of what we call the management structure. Or we can actually go to what we call the organizational structure. Let's look at the organizational structure and how it should be or how it must be. So it is not coming out clearly, but we can say that management structure of a media enterprise, it varies depending on the ownership system. That one we have already said. The size and the activities of a particular enterprise. I've given an example with a shop that we've just opened. They are best demonstrated through illustrations. So a structure is best demonstrated through an illustration, referred to as an organizational chart. Every organization has what we call a chart. So the chart illustrates the chain of command. When you talk about chain of command, we actually saying that the chart illustrates who is who in that particular organization, who does what in that particular organization. Like in most organizations, you'll find that the shareholder is the first person in that particular organization. In some organizations, no, not the shareholder, but we are talking about the proprietor is the owner of the organization. So he's actually the first person in an organization. Again, the people that follows apart from the proprietor or after the proprietor is the shareholders. The shareholders, remember, these are the people that owns the shares of this particular company. These are the people that actually are making this particular company, if it's a big company, to actually thrive in the market. For example, we can have let's say, let me give an example. There is this particular company or this particular chain of supermarkets. Its name was Uchumi. Its name is Uchumi Supermarket. And Uchumi Supermarket, it was operating some few years back. It operated very well, and you realize that it went bankrupt. And there is the shareholders. I remember very well this guy called the Chris Kirubi was one of the shareholders of Uchumi Supermarket. And when it collapsed, I think he was given something in compensation of maybe losing in compensation of this company going down. Because if a company goes down, it means that the people who actually lose a lot are the shareholders and the owner, the proprietor. So he was one of the major shareholders. And I remember very well him saying this, that they gave me a small check of 500 million, meaning that whatever he had invested there was a lot, was more than 500 million. So these are shareholder. So he owns part of the company. Maybe he was owning like 5% of the Uchumi Supermarket, or maybe he was owning like 3%, and the rest is owned by various individuals. So shareholders are the people that once they withdraw their shares, the company is actually going to experience a lot of difficulties. Then from there, we have what we call the board of directors. The board of directors are the people that are actually in charge of that particular company, in charge of hiring and firing. And maybe, for example, we need like the CEO of the company. if we need the CEO of the company, it is the board of directors that sit down and decides. They decide or they conduct an interview. They have to be informed when they are making such big decisions about who to hire as the CEO of the company. And when you're talking about the board of directors, we are talking when they come to think of who to hire, actually they make major decisions. Because an ordinary employee, a board of director will not convene itself because of an ordinary employee, say, for example, a customer service representative. No, actually the chief executive officer will be in charge of maybe the HR department and actually all the department in an organization. And once he's in charge of all the departments of the organizations, then the heads of departments are the ones that recommends the person to be, recommends the person to be hired or something like that. Then from there, we have the chief executive officer. The chief executive officer, we have said that is usually hired by the board of directors. And because we are doing media, then the next person there is the editor-in-chief. The editor-in-chief, actually we can call him the editor. You can call them the editor or the editor-in-chief. All of them are the same. So the editor is the person in charge of the editorial department. It's in charge of the editorial activities in the department. So he's in charge of the attaches that are there. He's in charge of the sub-editors. Actually, sub-editors report to the chief editor. He's in charge of the reporters, etc., etc. So he's the overall manager in an editorial department. Then from there, because now we know the structure, so in short, we can say that a structure is a chart showing the line of command, or showing the chain of command. That, for example, if I go to Safaricom and I want to talk to, let's say, for example, the marketing manager, I must be able to know that maybe there is the head of department. Apart from the head of department, maybe there is an assistant head of department. Then from the assistant head of department, we have now the staff, the senior staff. After the senior staff, then we have like that. So you need to know the people that you need to know the structure very well, in short, so that if you're going to air your complaint, then you know the right person to air the complaint to, something like that. So the chain of command shows who is who in that in a certain organization. So therefore, let's look at the types of communication that can be used in management. Let's look at the type of communication that can be used in management. Types of communication. Stephen, maybe I can ask you, how many types of communication do you know? And if you know them, can you be able to actually list them or actually mention them?
Types of communication.
What?
I don't think I can name them.
Why, you don't know them?
Yeah.
So anyway, that is the reason why you are here. That's the reason why you are in school, so that you can know them. So there are various types of communication that are used in management. So one of the things we can actually say that the managerial functions usually depend on the communication more than anything else, so that it can be able to do what? It can be able to be actualized. So even in a relationship that we live in, you come to realize that communication is very important. Communication is one of the key things. You need to communicate to the people that you live with and to the people that you have a relationship with. When I talk about a relationship, I don't talk about intimate relationship. I'm talking about any relationship. It can be a teacher-student relationship. It can be a father-children relationship, a husband-wife relationship, a son or children, parents relationship, or something like that. So you need to communicate, like maybe in case there is anything. And communication makes things easier, and it makes people to understand you more better when you communicate. So in this case, then we are going to look at the types of communication, and maybe we will start with what we call, I think we will start with what we call the downward communication. We will start with the downward communication. So downward communication, wait a minute. Types of communication, downward communication. So downward communication is a type of communication that occurs in an organization. And this type of communication is usually, for example, when a manager talks to the people below him in the chain of command. Let's say, for example, a branch manager wants to talk to the people in that particular branch. So the people in that particular branch are under him or her. So that is called downward communication. So it is communication coming from the topmost part of the organization towards the people down there, the people down that particular that particular system. This one we can actually talk about, or we can actually say this is a kind of communication whereby information originates from the management or a senior staff and is conveyed to subordinate or junior staff. Why are we saying this? It's because information flows from the top to bottom of the administration. So the most common methods of conveying downward communication, number one, you can convey this particular communication through meetings. So the manager can decide to call a meeting and talk to his people. He can talk to his people through a meeting. He can also decide to call a briefing. A briefing is not a meeting, but a briefing is, we can actually call it a meeting, but it is a brief meeting. Let's say, for example, 10, 15 minutes. Then everybody goes back to their course or to their works. He can also use a memo to communicate to his staff. So when he uses a memo, this memo usually, it can be in form of an email. The memo can be in form of an email. The memo can be written down and pinned to strategic points in that particular organization or that particular branch. He can also use letters. The manager can use letters to communicate to his juniors. Like he can write you a letter. Maybe he wants to give you a leave letter. He wants to give you a leave so he can leave. You want to go to leave or for leave. So he writes you a letter and you proceed to leave. He can also make a phone call. The manager can make a phone call. He can call you wherever you are in your office, and then you conduct a meeting through phone call. So those are the various ways that downward communication can actually be achieved. So we have said, number one, he can call a meeting. He can call briefings, whereby we have said briefings are short meetings. We can actually say between a meeting of up to like 15 minutes or 30 minutes. Then he can use a memo. He can write a memo to his employees that are under him. And he can also write letters. We have given an example of maybe you want to proceed to leave. So he may write you a letter to show the authenticity of your leave. Then he can also make a call. He can call you from the office and actually tell you or direct you to do something or not to do something. Then from there, we have another type of communication. And this type of communication is what we call upward communication. So upward communication is the opposite of the downward communication. Yvette, welcome back. You have taken time to take your lunch. You've taken time to Irene Mbone, welcome. You've also taken a lot of time to take your lunch, but you're welcome. Now, let's look at the upward communication. So upward communication is a type of communication that occurs in an organization, and this time round, it occurs from the bottom to upwards. So it is coming from the people or from the workers to the managers, to the people at the top. Thank you, Irene. So we are saying that this is whereby upward communication is a process. This is whereby information originates from the subordinates. The subordinates are other employees apart from the top managers. So it originates from other employees or junior staff, and it is conveyed to the management or senior staff. So it is conveyed to the management or senior staff. And this information actually usually flow from bottom of the hierarchy towards the top. It originates or it flows from bottom of the hierarchy towards the top. And it is referred to as upward communication. So what are types of communication? What are common methods that are used in communicating as far as upward communication is concerned? So a junior staff may decide to use a letter. He may decide to use a letter to communicate to a senior staff. Like for example, most of the time, if you want to quit a job, you just don't quit. You just don't say, mimi sijisikii kwenda kazi na siendi leo, so wajipange. That is not the best way to quit a job. So the best way to quit a job is to write a letter and you direct that letter to your senior, so that your senior, and you even give what? You even give them a period. Like for example, a period of 1 week. You tell them next week, maybe, or 2 weeks, depending on the MOU, the memorandum of understanding, or depending on the contract. Some contracts will say that you give 2 weeks notice before you leave the organization. Other will require you to give 3 months notice. Other will require you to give at least 1 month notice. So if you want to quit a job, if the contract says that you give 2 weeks notice, then it is always good to write a letter and direct them to the right persons. Direct them to the right persons. So an employee can write a letter, not only quitting for a job, but letters can be of many reasons. Maybe he writes a letter, maybe to explain something, or he can write a letter to show his dissatisfaction, about a particular decision that was made, or even he can write a letter to tell the management why he was not able to execute a certain task successfully. So he can write a letter. The next thing, he can use a suggestion box. Remember, suggestion box are put on strategic positions in an organization. And the reason why we have suggestion box, number one, suggestion box are to give complaints, to give compliment, not only complaints, but we have realized that many people, especially human beings, let me talk about human beings, they like complaining more than complimenting. So they are actually made for available for compliment, and they are also made available for improvement. Maybe you saw something and you didn't like about it, and maybe you are giving a suggestion about how something should be carried on or should be conducted for effective, what we call effective results. So those are the kind of things. So you can use letters, you can use suggestion boxes, you can also use meetings. Like a junior staff or the subordinate employees or junior staff can call for a meeting and they say, we want manager A to talk to us about a certain issue. I hope I'm understood, Yvette.
Yes.
So what can you say, Yvette, about upward communication? What have you understood?
Upward communication is used when an upper hierarchy, let me say like the manager or the CEO, wants to speak to the employees.
That is upward.
Oh, upward. Sorry. You asked about upward.
Yes.
Or upward is used when employees talk to their management, like maybe a resignation letter. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I mean. Now, this lady called Irene, you must be ready because the next question will go to you. So the next, what we call the next type of communication is what we call the lateral communication, or what we call, or you can still call it the horizontal communication. Now, horizontal communication is totally different from upward and downward communication. Now, this kind of communication is when communication actually transfers between one person who are at the same level of the administrative hierarchy. Like, for example, we can have a head of department marketing, and we can have a head of department finance. So communication between these two heads of communication, these two heads of department, is referred to as horizontal communication. All of you are at the same level. All of you are head of department. Like, we can also say communication between manager in branch A and communication between manager in branch A with manager in branch B. Now, that is what we call the horizontal or lateral communication, because these people are on the same level of management. So what can they use to communicate? The most common means of communication here include things like meetings. So these two managers can actually conduct a meeting. And you're not talking about the two. We can have a meeting of all the managers from various branches. So these people can decide to convene a meeting, and discuss the issues that are affecting them. We can also, so they can have a meeting. The next thing is that they can decide to talk to each other through letters. So manager A can write a letter to manager B, or manager A can write a letter to the various managers in various departments. They can also call each other. They can use phone calls to call each other, etc. So they can use those, but they cannot use memo. So a manager cannot write another manager a memo. Let me ask a question, and this one goes to Irene. Irene, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Let me ask you,
Yes.
can a student write a memo to his head of department?
Yes.
You can.
Pardon?
I'm asking, you are a student
Yes.
at Zitech University. Can
Yes.
you write a memo to your head of department to communicate your issues?
Yes, I can.
Yvette, can you write a memo to your head of department? Maybe to communicate your issues, what you are going through, etc., etc.
No.
Why? Yvette, we are waiting for your answer. You said no, so you have to provide a reason why you cannot write a memo to your head of department. Yvette, we are waiting. Maybe Stephen, you can try.
What's the question again?
You can write a memo to your head of department.
Talking about your issues.
Yeah, talking about maybe about your issues, what you're going through, or maybe a complaint or something like that.
Yeah.
Yvette. Yvette, are you here? Yvette ametoroka. Anyway, hiyo swali atatujibu akirudi. Hiyo sitamwachia. That question Yvette has to answer. So that is what we call lateral communication. So it is communication between two levels of department. So what are the roles of communication in a media house management? So one of the role of communication is that the administrative is able to function and convey its administrative decision. Or maybe this one can be a question to all of us. What are the roles of communication in a media house or in media house management? All of us are going to give. Me, I'm giving mine. One of the roles is that the administrative function is able to convey the administrative decisions and changes to stakeholders of the media enterprise. So you come to realize that the organization or the functions of the administrative are able to convey their decision or changes that are taking place in the organization to their stakeholders and actually the media enterprise. For example, when you appoint a new CEO, you are able to communicate to the stakeholders. You are able to communicate to the public at large. When you dismiss a certain employee because of reasons that cannot be explained, you are able actually to communicate to the public and to the stakeholders. when you promote someone, maybe you have promoted one of your manager to become a CEO, you can be able to communicate to the outside world and also to the entire organization. So that is one role of communication in media house management. Now we are starting with the first person, Emma. Now let's start with Stephen. What are some of the other roles of communication?
Communication. But I'm not quite sure, but I think to motivate other people.
Stephen is saying to motivate other people. Irene?
Is it correct?
Yeah, communication can be used to motivate other people. Irene?
On my side, I think communication will help bring people at the same like they'll be able to understand themselves better, being at the same level.
For example, give us an example.
Let's say we are considering people a certain department. Maybe a certain information had been said and some did not understand. So maybe when they get to sit together and communicate, then they'll get to understand
Yvette, you are
each
back.
other better.
Yeah, it is okay. Yvette?
Yes.
What are some of the importance of communication? Before you answer that question, why did you say that you cannot write a memo to your HOD?
Okay, I thought that maybe a letter would be better. Yeah.
Why would you go to a letter but not the memo? Why would you not write a memo to your HOD? Yvette ameshindwa hiyo. So, okay, we have been, Emma, can you tell us the importance of communication? Ama ni nani alikuwa anaongea? Ni Emma. Watu wakiambiwa waongee wanapotea. Anyway, let's look at the media ownership patterns. So when you talk about the media ownership pattern, media ownership can either be what we call the sole proprietor or can be owned by an individual or the government. So there are only two patterns of ownership, either by self or the government. So media can be owned by a government or an individual. So you come to realize that one of the functions of the media in general, one of the functions of the media in general, or let's start from the beginning. We are looking at media ownership patterns. When you talk about media ownership patterns, they are simply the authority under which media enterprises are owned. Structurally, media enterprise can be owned by government or private investors. Like KBC, when you look at KBC, you come to realize that KBC is owned by the government. And we are going to look at the function of this particular media house. So we are saying that the government, what we call KBC, Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, and controlled by the government through an act of parliament. So everything that KBC does, it does that because it has been directed by the government to do so. So government-owned media enterprise, they're actually funded by the exchequer. That is their financial maintenance is dependent on allocation from government budgetary. So the management of government media enterprise is appointed and supervised by the government, especially through cabinet secretary or of information and technology. So what are some of the functions of government-owned media enterprise? Number one, they are to foster what we call the national integration. National integration is actually bringing people together. We call crisis, etc., etc. And when there is what we call people are not able to understand each other. Like for example, when there is crisis, you come to realize that there is from the government. Especially, we can also talk about coronavirus. You can actually see that there is this thing called there is this website that has been not website, but people can be able to donate what they have so that it can be used to actually curb or help the people who are actually sick as far as corona is concerned. So their work is to foster national integration. National integration is bringing people together to promote unity and harmony between various social groups in the country. Again, it is to convey information to the public. So the work of KBC is to convey information to the public, also for entertainment. So you can switch on KBC and you'll find that if it is not entertainment, they are conveying information. If they are not conveying information, they are fostering what we call national integration, ETC. They are also there to do what we call setting national agendas, whether political, social, or economic. Like for example, to make popular crucial government plans to the people. So the plans that the government has to the people. And the last thing we can say, that in the event that the public broadcaster makes profit or has substantial financial resources at its disposal, such funds ought to be utilized for the purpose of. So let's look at how that money is used. So if KBC makes money out of broadcasting news and everything, so how is that money used? That money is used for, it can be used for expansion in terms of operation or reach effectiveness. It can also be used for technological improvement in their transmission. It can also be used for purposes of research, fostering association with international network, for example, CCTV, BBC, CNN, and also acquiring appropriate human resource capacity and maintaining them. So resource capacity, remember we talked about people, acquiring appropriate human resource capacity. So the money that KBC makes out of broadcasting, its news and communication, it does what we have talked about. Number one, we have said expansion, either in operations or reach effectiveness. The second, we have said that it is technological improvement. Remember, this is technology has to be improved for the purpose of actually giving effective transmission. So they are also used for research purposes, and they are also used for fostering association with international networks, for example, CCTV, BBC, and also CNN. this money that they get also can be used to acquire appropriate human resource capacity. Like, for example, you may not be having enough technician in your, we may not be having enough technician as KBC employees. So we can acquire new technician through the profit that we get from our media house. Then from there, we have what we call the privately owned media enterprises. So we have so many privately owned media enterprises. Maybe we can have example from Steven. Give us one example of a privately owned media enterprise.
Royal Media.
Yeah, we have Royal Media. The next person is Emma. Emma, give us an example of a privately owned media enterprise. Yvette?
Nation Media.
We have Nation Media. Then we have Irene Bonne. Give us an example of a privately media enterprise.
I was only aware of the Royal Media.
Irene, where do you come from? Or where are you as we speak?
Kitale.
You're in Kitale.
Yes.
But I also believe that you watch various TV stations.
Yes.
Which TV station do you know?
Citizen.
What I want 5. One is Citizen. Another one?
KBC.
KBC. Another one?
NTV.
You have NTV. Another one?
KTN.
KTN. Yeah, that is what I'm looking for. Eh? We have KTN. Yes. Then we can have Emma.
Yes.
Privately owned media house. That's what we are looking for.
Max Media.
What? Media Max.
Yeah.
Hiyo ndio naita Max Media.
That one.
Hewe, hapana. Be very careful sometimes. It is Media Max. So we have Media Max, aka K24, and so on and so forth. So we have so many privately owned media houses. If you Google them, there are so many. I think they can get to around even 200. But the one we know is Royal Media, Nation Media, KTN, Media Max. We also have others like we can talk of the Christian ones. All those are privately owned media houses. Thank you for your contribution. So these privately owned media houses, they exist for the purposes of making profit. And much of the profit is earned through advertising revenue. So that's why you realize that when you go to media, Royal Media, you cannot watch a program without having a series of advertisements. So much of the revenue is earned through what we call advertising, and also through the sales of space or airtime. We talk about sale of space or airtime is that time that is used for you to maybe broadcast a live event or maybe to bring about your program. Kama kwa mfano unapata ya kwamba wakati fulani kuna wakati wa program fulani let's say there is that time for Papa Shirandula, etc. That time is usually paid for. If the program is not a citizen program, as it's not a citizen program, then if it is an individual program, then that person usually pay for that particular time that his or her program usually airs on TV. Then we have privately owned, we can say privately owned media organizations are allocated frequencies. They are allocated frequencies, and they usually operate licenses they operate licenses that are provided by the Ministry of Information and Technology through the Communication Authority of Kenya. So the Communication Authority of Kenya usually also acts as what? As a supervisor. So they oversee what you're doing as a media house. So these are what we call privately owned media enterprises. They sometimes are sole proprietors or partnership. So you realize KTN is not a sole proprietorship. Sole proprietorship is a business that is owned by one organization. So again, we can have partnership. Ya kwamba mimi siwezi kuendesha hii station peke yangu, so ninatafuta partnership. So example of sole proprietorship media houses, we have the Royal Media Services is a sole proprietorship. This media house is owned by only one person, and his name is SK Masharia. About NTV, about KTN, and about Media Max. Yeah, okay, even Media Max. Media Max is not a sole prop, it's a sole proprietorship. It's a sole proprietorship. It's owned by the Uhuru family. So it's a sole proprietorship company. The rest, like the Nation Media and KTN, they are not owned by individuals. They are owned by a group of people. Therefore, we can call them partnership. They have partnered to actually make sure that that media house is in place. And then there is a question up to that point. Irene, do you have a question?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, continue.
Like we've been talking about the privately owned those stations. Then after that, you were talking about something. I never heard it well. Whatever you're from explaining.
So I'm saying this, Irene,
Yes.
that when you talk about ownership, media house can be privately owned or it can be personally owned. When it is personally owned, it is referred to as what we call sole proprietorship. So it can be a sole proprietorship stroke personally owned. It is owned by one person. When it is owned by one person, it is known as sole proprietorship. A very good example of a sole proprietorship media house is Royal Media. And we have said Royal Media is owned by one and only person. His name is SK Masharia. So he is the owner. He can decide to fire everybody and remain there as with his company. Those other organizations, like for example, the Nation Media and the KTN, even Media Max is a sole proprietorship. It is owned by the Uhuru family. So they are the owners. So it's a sole proprietorship business. Like Nation and KTN, these ones are privately, they are privately owned, but they are partnership. So KTN has got its partners that they have contributed. One partner has contributed like 50%, and the other one has contributed like 50%. So when the profits are there, they share amongst themselves. But as far as Royal Media is concerned, because it is a sole proprietorship business, once they make that profit, the profit remains with the owner. So and when you talk about profit, profit comes when you remove all the overheads, all the spendings, and then what you remain with after paying your employees, after paying for maybe for the services or for the license, after paying everything, that money that remains is what we call profit. Now that profit, as far as Royal Media is concerned, it goes to SK Masharia's account. Irene, are we okay? Irene, have you understood now?
Yes. I'm now okay.
Yvette anasema ya kwamba anakuwa na disconnection problem. Sasa Yvette, sasa sijui tutakwambia upande kwa mti, sababu najua uko mbali sana na Nairobi. Sisi tuko Nairobi, so hatuna connection problem sana. Uko karibu na booths. So that is it. So from there, then we can talk about, again, before I move from that section, you come to realize that both sole proprietorship and partnership has advantages and disadvantages. Like if you're a sole proprietor of a certain organization, if you die, the organization, in most instances, that business might die with you. But in partnership, if you die, the other partner can continue with the business and nothing is going to actually be interfered with that much. But if you're a sole proprietor, you come to realize that if you die, that business might not perform better than it is performing when you are there. It might now start performing poorly because you are not around. So so there are some advantages and disadvantages. So I don't want to look into advantages and disadvantages. So from there we have ownership patterns. So we can say that ownership patterns, let me put it there so that all of us can see. Then I will explain. Let me project it here. And we can say that ownership patterns determine media managerial decisions in 4 major ways: law and regulation. Now, ownership patterns determine media managerial decisions in 4 major ways. That the pattern of ownership. So when you talk about pattern of ownership, we are either talking about partnership or sole proprietorship. So that pattern determines the media managerial decisions in 4 major ways. That for a decision to be made, as far as that ownership pattern is concerned, these are the ways that, managerial decisions are determined in 4 major ways as far as that ownership is concerned. Like, for example, it determines the law and regulation. The type of ownership will determine the law and regulation. So when you talk about determining law and regulation, we are saying that this factor involves the policy under which the media establishment operates. So every organization operates under a certain policy. So this particular factor of law and regulation will involve that policy. So if a media establishment is a government-owned, its objectivity may be specifically tailored to propagate government propaganda. We are saying that if a media establishment is government-owned, its objectivity may be specifically tailored to propagate government propaganda. So that might be its objectivity. So in this kind of establishment, all managerial decisions are made to serve government interests. So as far as KBC is concerned, all these managerial decisions are made to serve the government interests. So everything that is made to serve the government interests. So in Kenya, you come to realize that KBC is the mouthpiece of the government. And now KBC is required by law to perform high-level campaign that is aimed at informing. So the work of KBC must be to do what? To inform, to educate, integrating, and entertaining publics. So the government role merely is supervisory. For example, when you talk about BBC, when you talk about BBC, you come to realize that they are made to serve government interests. And the government interest is to do what? To educate, to inform, and to integrate and to entertain. Is there any confusion there? Is there anybody confused about the law and regulation? So we are saying law and regulation that when you talk about the government, mainly the government is the one that is in charge. It should be in charge of educating, entertaining, integration, etc. So you come to realize that most media houses that are governmental, the government is used as the mouthpiece. No, the station is used as the mouthpiece of the organization. So you also come to realize that whenever there is what we call a parliament proceeding that is going on, it is only KBC that brings this particular government proceeding. Other media stations are shunned off, so they cannot bring live parliamentary proceedings. So you come to realize that most of the time KBC is the one that will be airing this live, meaning that it has been used as the government mouthpiece. So let's look at profitability. So depending on the kind of ownership, profitability is also another factor. So when you talk about profitability, we are saying this, that privately owned media houses or enterprises are established with one objective, which we said is to make profit. And more often, managers have to make decisions that result to profit. So their main focus is what we call profit. So, for example, the manager may do what? May make decisions that result to profit. For example, hiring less qualified personnel. So you realize that we are going to hire less qualified personnel so that we can pay them less. Because the more qualified, I mean, the more you hire, the more qualified. You're going to spend more money paying these qualified personnel. So you might see that the private sectors or the privately owned organizations, they are going to hire less qualified personnel so that they can pay them less. Because the main aim of these particular media houses, especially, is to actually make profit, especially the privately owned media houses. Their main aim is to make profit. Question. Yvette, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Is there any question?
No.
Steven?
No.
Irene? Irene, is there any question?
No, I don't have any question.
Emma?
No question.
So you are good. So what have you understood about law and regulation, Emma?
From the beginning of the part you just covered,
Tell me what you have understood.
well, I've understood that in the media, the media is owned as in it is owned into
Continue, I can hear you.
those owned by the government and the private. For example, the media that is owned by the government is the KBC. And
So, let's talk about ownership.
Ownership.
We have talked about ownership, and we looked at law and regulation, and we were looking at profitability. So can you tell us something about profitability?
Well, on the profitability, the private-owned medias are basically established for profit. So you have given an example that, for example, if they want to make more profit, they will hire the less qualified, because when they hire the high qualified, they will not make more profit.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I can now see that you are alert. We go to the next thing, which is advertising revenue. Remember, we said that advertising is the core business. Like if you're watching Citizen, like if you're watching your most popular program, maybe you're watching Maria, you would not watch Maria for 30 minutes. In between, there are so many adverts that comes in. Why? Because adverts, we said that they are the ones that brings about more revenue to this organization. So you'll come to realize that when you're watching a program in a privately owned organization, there are a lot of adverts there are a lot of adverts to an extent that you cannot enjoy that particular program or a program. So we are saying that media businesses depend on advertising revenue for profitability. That one is very, very, very true. Many at times, organizations spend millions to attract advertisements to their enterprises. So in short, we are saying that advertising is one of the core business of privately owned media houses. But as far as the government-owned media houses, what we call advertising brings money, but their main or their core business is not to make profit. Profit is good, but their core business is not to make profit. Their core business is to educate. Their core business is to integrate, and their core business is to communicate or to actually make to pass information to the public, and also to do what? To pass information to the public. Now that is the core business of government-owned media enterprises. As far as this one we call KBs, others like KTN, others like Nations, and other like Royal Media, their core business is to make profit. And therefore, you realize that there are so many adverts there. So again, the next thing, which is point D, is proprietor affiliation. So proprietor affiliation actually refers to the personnel involvement of proprietors, the personal involvement of proprietors. That is their family ties. Like for example, you realize that MediaMax, a very good example is MediaMax. You find that the MediaMax is owned by families. You also realize that a media enterprise like KTN is owned mostly by political loyalties. You find that politicians owns KTN, and also you realize that there are other organizations or media enterprises that are even owned by religious people, like Deliverance TV, like this other one called this one for Pastor Manyuru. What do you call it? I think this one Yvette should tell us. Yvette, is Yvette on?
Yes.
There is this program for Pastor Manyuru Aviation TV. Yeah, it's called the Aviation TV. Now you come to realize it is owned by religious people. So there are those stations that are owned by either politicians, either by a family, either by something like that, a certain group of people, maybe a group of leaders, maybe Islam or something like that. So that is point number what? Number 4, proprietor. So we are talking about proprietor, and we have said that proprietor affiliation, it refers to the personal involvement of proprietors. That is family ties. You realize that some organizations are owned by families, like MediaMax is owned by family. That is Uhuru family. You come to realize that others are owned by political loyalties. These are organization like KTN. KTN is owned by politicians, and also others are owned by religious families. For example, we have Deliverance TV, we have Aviation TV, we also have others like there are so many, yeah? And then we have others that are ethnics affiliation, ethnic. So you realize that others are owned by a certain ethnic group. Now this one I can go to Irene Mbone. I believe you watch Meru TV. We have Meru TV, Irene. Irene. Or we can talk to Emma. Emma, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Do you watch, which TV do you watch?
Citizen.
No, wacha kutuambia mambo ya Citizen. I'm talking about a local TV station ambayo wewe una watch.
Hakuna.
Emma, unaishi wapi?
Nairobi.
Hiyo unadanganya sasa. Irene. Irene, where do you live? Irene amehepa. Anyway, we can have our stations that are owned by a certain ethnic group. Like we can have Meru TV, we can have Weru TV, we can have Inoro, but Inoro now it is owned by Citizen. We can have those ones that zimejitokeza tu zenyewe ambazo zinaoniwa na various tribes. Unless kuna swali, we can move to something else.
City.
You are saying something, Irene. What are you saying? Ama nikupe dakika kidogo ufunze wanafunzi wenye wako online. So let's look at media managerial operations. We are going to look, when you talk about media managerial operations, we are going to look at the people who work in a media house. So when you talk about media managerial operation, we are looking at the people who work in a certain media house. And these people, tutawajua leo. One of the person who work in a certain media house, his name is or actually, yeah, we have the board of directors. Media managerial operations. Yeah, when you talk about media managerial operations, these are the people that are in charge of the operations of the media house. Now, number one, we can have the board of directors. Remember that we talked about board of directors, like when you talk about Citizen TV or Royal Media. Let's talk about Royal Media because it incorporates Citizen TV, Inoro TV, Ramogi FM, and so on and so forth. When you talk about Royal Media Services, the first person who comes here, number one, is actually the proprietor. The proprietor is the owner of the organization. Then after the proprietor, we have the board of directors. Then after the board of directors, we have the shareholders. So after the shareholders, we have the chief executive officer, the managing officer, editor-in-chief, and associate editors. Associate editors are other editors. Other editors apart from the editor-in-chief, because we said that the editor-in-chief is in charge of the editorial department. So I want us to look at the board of directors. I want us to look at them, and we must be very careful because I'm going to ask each one of you a question. So ninaweza amua kuuliza Steven kuhusu the chief executive officer, his roles. Naweza amua kuuliza Emma about the associate editors, what they do. I can still decide to ask Yvette about the editor-in-chief, what is his role in managerial operations of the media. Now, we start with what we call the board of directors. So the board of directors is either partners, these are either partners of the enterprise or professionals selected by shareholders of the organization. So these are partners of the enterprise or professionals selected by the shareholders. So they are selected by the shareholders. So these, what are their roles? So their roles are, number one, they are the decision makers of the organization. So they make decisions. Remember, the topmost person in this list is the media owner. Is actually the media owner, the proprietor. So the proprietor is the one that comes up with a board, and he calls this board the board of directors. Now, what are the work of the board of directors? The board of directors, their work, they actually make the work of the proprietor very easy. So the proprietor is the owner, ndio mwenye media house. Na huyu proprietor kama yeye ndio mwenye media house, yeye mwenyewe amekaa chini akatengeneza board. Na hii board akaita board of director or board of directors. Na hii board of director ndio inamfanyia kazi yote. So kazi yao ni gani? Kazi yao ni, number one, is to actually make sure that they are the decision makers. Hao ndio wanafanya inaitwa namna gani? Wanaamua mambo. So they make decisions for the organization. Number two, they choose managers, including the managing directors. They choose managers. So they decide who is going to be a manager in this particular in this particular department. Who is going to be the manager in the editor, so that we can have the manager we can have a manager that actually manages editing or the editorial. So they choose managers, including the managing directors. The next thing, they formulate policies. They usually formulate policies. and regulations for the organization. They can also review these policies. Policies ni sheria ama ni sheria ambazo zina guide organization. So they can decide to change these policies. So they also approve tenders. Remember, in government we have tenders. So they sit down when they are approving tenders. Maybe they want suppliers. Maybe wanataka supplier fulani awaletee cameras. Maybe wanataka supplier fulani awa-supply na lenses za camera. Ama wanataka supplier fulani alete materials za kuprint newspaper. So they approve tenders and contracts. They review performance of the organization. So they sit down and say, this year, we have not made profit. So they review performance. How have the organization performed in that particular organization? So they also recommend measures for improvement. So they can say, this year we did not make money, a lot of profit. So we are recommending that next year, these are the things that we are going to do so that we don't do what? So that we don't make losses. Then apart from board of directors, we have shareholders. Shareholders can be anybody. Even you can be a shareholder. But how important you are or how strong you are in decision making depends on how much or how many shares you own in a certain company. So if you are a shareholder and you have only like 0.001% shares, then that means your say is not taken so much seriously. So shareholders only exist when media enterprises is in a joint stock or when it is in a stock market. Umesikia kuhusu Nairobi stock market, NSC. So for you to actually make your organization or to attract shares in your organization, then you must be a member of the Nairobi stock market so that you can give people or the public an opportunity to buy shares for your company. So these are, we can say they are investors. So shareholders are just investors. And we can call them, it can be a person who have invested capital in the organization. So capital in form of shares. So labda ulinunua maybe 1,000 shares za hiyo kampuni, or maybe you bought 500 shares of that company. So that is a person who owns a part of that particular organization. So as far as shareholders are concerned, they elect or select members of the board. So they are the one who usually say, we want this person to be a board member. So they elect or select members who are going to sit as board of directors. So they also approve a long-term and short-term organizational plan during annual general meeting. So plans zikikuja, they approve them. If it's a long-term plan, they approve or disapprove them. So this is the role of the shareholders. Number one, we have said they are investors. So these are people who have invested capital in that particular organization. Number two, they elect or select members of the board of directors. So they're in charge of selecting or electing people to represent them in the board as board of director members or something. So they approve long-term and short-term organizational plans during annual general meeting. So they have what we call an AGM, annual general meeting. So they approve plans or disapprove those plans, whether they are long-term plans or short-term plans. So shareholders has got 3 roles. They invest their capital, they elect or select members in their to represent them in the board of directors as board of directors. They also approve long-term and short-term organizational plans during general meetings. Then from there, we move to what we call the Chief Executive Officer, the CEO. Umesikia kuhusu Chief Executive Officer Safaricom, Chief Executive Officer KQ, Chief Executive Officer ABC Company, like that. So let's look at this guy called the Chief Executive Officer. So the Chief Executive Officer in some organization is referred to as what we call referred to as the managing director. So sometimes you'll find that I want to see the managing director. So he is the chief administrative officer of the organization. So yeye ndio anaitwa chief administrative officer of a particular organization. So all staffs in the organization are answerable to him. So every staff in Safaricom is answerable to every staff in the organization is answerable to the Chief Executive Officer. He controls, supervises, coordinates, and regulates the operations of the organization. So he controls and he supervises, coordinates and regulates the operations of the organization. He is also the chief budgeting and planning officer of the organization. He is the chief budgeting and planning officer of the organization. The next point, he is the spokesman of the organization. So he speaks on behalf of the organization. He represents the organization in an external forum. He chairs all administrative meetings. He approves appointments, etc., etc. There are so many points under that. Then from there, we have the editor-in-chief. I hope we are together. Irene, are we together?
Yes, we are together.
You are writing notes, eh? Because I have a question for you.
Yes.
Same to Emma, Stephen, and Yvette. And if there is a question you can ask. Kama kuna swali mtu anaweza uliza. So let's look at editor-in-chief. Some of the organization actually refer him as an editorial director or the editorial director. So he is in charge of the department, the editorial department of the media enterprise. Just like we said that the editor-in-chief is in charge of the editorial department. The next point, he is the most influential department head of the media enterprise. He is the most influential department head of the media enterprise. So he has a lot of influence. Remember, the editor-in-chief is hired by the board of directors. He also controls the editorial policy of the organization. He controls the editorial policy of the organization. He approves editorial decisions. He approves the editorial decisions. So if a decision has been made in the editorial department and this decision is not good, he disapproves it. He also supervises editors, sub-editors, and editorial operations. He supervises editors, sub-editors, and editorial operations. He is answerable to the Chief Executive Officer. Remember, the Chief Executive Officer is the person answerable to the organization. So he's answerable to the Chief Executive Officer. And sometimes the Chief Executive Officer is also the editorial director. Sometimes the Chief Executive Officer is also the editorial director. So the editor-in-chief also formulates policies for editorial development. Editor-in-chief also formulates policies for editorial development, editorial changes, and associations. Then we go to associate editors. Associate editors. So associate editors are other editors apart from the chief editor. These are the sub-editors and so on and so forth. Kuna swali? Do we have a question? Then if there is no question, my question will start with Yvette, and Yvette will tell us the work of the Chief Executive Officer. You summarize everything for us.
The Chief Executive Officer.
Yes, the Chief Executive Officer.
He is in charge of budgeting and the planning of the company.
In charge of budgeting and the planning of the company.
He's the spokesman of the organization.
Yes.
And he chairs the administration meetings.
Good. Continue.
He controls and supervises the organization, like what the organization does.
There are so many things.
And he's answerable like for the whole company.
Yes, he's answerable to all staffs in the organizations. I mean, now all staffs in the organization are answerable to him. He's answerable to the board of directors. What else? We said that he's
the managing director, like, yeah.
Yes, we also said that he chairs all administrative meetings. He approves all appointments. And when you talk about appointments, he also approves demotions and promotions. He also approves transfer or dismissal. He approves all contracts, tenders, etc., etc. So the next question goes to Stephen. Stephen, you're going to tell us the board of directors. What are the roles of the board of directors? Stephen, we are waiting.
The roles.
We can hear you properly.
They recruit members.
They recruit.
Members.
Continue.
They compensate for the manager.
Mm-hmm.
And establish a policy.
Yes, now we said this, that the board of director is either a partner of the enterprise or professional selected by the shareholders. So they are the decision makers of the organization. That is what we said. They choose managers, including the managing directors. They formulate policies and regulations for the organization. They can also review them, and then they approve tenders, contracts, etc. We go to the next person. Is it okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
You have said the decision makers.
Yeah, we have said they are the decision makers of the organization.
See, also the CEO is a decision maker.
The CEO is also a member of the board.
Oh,
Something I forgot to tell you. The chief executive officer is also the board member. That's why he can do what? Like, he can make decisions.
okay.
So Yvette has spoken to us. Let's hear Irene. Irene, you're going to tell us about the editor-in-chief. Akiangai ni hiyo. The editor-in-chief, what does he do?
Okay. We said that the editor-in-chief first is the most influential head in that department, and some of his functions are that he approves editorial decisions.
Good.
He also supervises.
Supervises who?
Editors and editorial operations. He's also answerable to the CEO. And he formulates policies for editorial development, changes, and negotiations.
Something else? Zimeisha?
Yes.
Yeah, you have said what you have said. It's always good to say something that you have. So we have said that it is referred to as the editorial director. He's in charge of editorial department. He's the most influential person in the department or in the media enterprise. He controls the editorial policy of the organization, and he ensures that the absolute implementation of the policy. He ensures the absolute implementation of the policy. He chairs editorial meetings. He also approves editorial decision, etc., etc. We are going now to Mehepa. Irene. Irene, can you hear? Irene, unatusikia?
Yes.
Haya, nataka utuambie the managing director or the managing officer, what does he do? What are his roles?
Pardon?
The managing director or the managing, we call him the managing editor. What does he do? Managing officer.
The managing officer. Sorry. Didn't we first say that the managing officer is also the chief executive officer?
He said he's the chief executive officer, the CEO.
Yes.
That is what we said. The managing officer is the CEO. Can somebody help Irene? Yvette, are you in a position to help Irene?
Yes.
Haya, msaidie. Irene, msaidie. Irene, you can't help. Yvette, maybe you can help. Nobody is willing to help you. Hawa hawakupendi. Wewe upendwi na hawa watu wetu. So I'm going to share the notes on that particular topic. We are remaining with 40 minutes. So I'm going to post a discussion forum. So I'm going to create a discussion forum and you're going to discuss the duties and the responsibility of the following, the people that I'm going to put there. So ensure that you contribute on that. It's from that contribution that I will either mark you present or absent. Tafadhali. Kuna kitu ninaita forum, nitaiweka hapo, and we are supposed to actually contribute to that forum. So we go back. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going back to make sure that we have the forum with us. Then from there, we can contribute towards the discussions, unless there is a question. For those who have come late, this recording, I'm recording this, and in a few minutes time, it's going to be posted automatically to our portal. So it's upon you now to do what? It's upon you to download and listen. So ninaenda kutengeneza discussion forum. Nataka kila mtu a contribute kwa hiyo discussion forum. If I don't see your name and you are in this particular class, I'm not going to take you present. So be able to actually do what? Contribute at least something in that particular discussion forum. So by that, I call that class, this particular forum, hii ambayo tuko nayo, closed. Hii nina end saa hii so that we can go to the discussion forum. So you give me like 2 minutes, I add the discussion forum, then we continue. So I'm ending the meeting right away, unless there is a question. No question.